We are live on Facebook now too.
All right, Frank, are we ready to go then?
We are ready to go. Thank you.
Great. Okay, thank you very much. Welcome, everyone, and we're excited to have you all here. I'm Bonnie McDonald, and I'm the president of Landmarks Illinois. Now, we are going to begin the annual meeting shortly. As our members and guests are coming into the webinar, I just want to review a few short housekeeping items. First of all, we welcome our guests on Facebook Live. Glad to have you here. The Zoom is being recorded, and the recording is going to be uploaded to our YouTube page, our YouTube channel. So if you would like to share the presentation with others who couldn't be here today, you can send them to our YouTube channel. Our YouTube viewers can also select to have the presentation translated into another preferred language. So to optimize the person who is speaking today, we recommend that you choose the speaker view setting, which is found on the upper right-hand corner of your screen under the button View. You can also turn off or turn on the closed captions at the bottom of your screen. You'll see that CC button. Now, finally, feel free to type questions into the question and answer, or you can put comments into the chat. We are going to answer these live at the end of the program if we have time. And now I am very pleased to introduce Landmarks Illinois Board Chair, Gary Anderson, to take over. Welcome, Gary.
Thank you, Bonnie, and good afternoon, members and friends. Welcome to Landmarks Illinois annual meeting. We are excited to celebrate the impact that we've had together this year and to share more about the direction that we see for preservation in the future. I would like to thank our generous annual meeting sponsors. Our gold sponsors are Victoria Granicke and Revive Architecture. Our annual meeting sponsors have provided us with the needed financial support for the staff time that goes into producing the annual report, hosting the annual meeting, and ensuring we can make this event free to all members of all of our members and of the public. Again, we thank you all. First, let's get through the business at hand. I hereby call the 52nd annual Landmarks Illinois Board meeting to order. First up is the election of our board members. Landmarks Illinois is by a volunteer board of up to 37 members who govern, set policy, and ensure that we achieve our strategic vision to help people save places for people. These board members contribute their skills, wisdom, and resources to lead our organization forward. I thank all of you for your generosity and commitment to Landmarks Illinois and for being such an amazing team to work with. I am pleased to introduce Vice Chair Allison Tunin-Talamo, who led this year's board development process and will introduce our excellent slate of candidates. Allie?
Thank you, Gary. It has been a privilege to lead the recruitment process as the Board Development Committee Chair, and I thank the Executive Committee for their participation. The Landmarks Illinois website included information on how members could nominate a board candidate for consideration. We received no new candidate names from the membership, so the slate of candidates stands as presented today. The following are members for a renomination to the board. For election to their third two-year term, Peter Babane, Anthony Borage, Tracy Dillard, Brad Moeller, Jeff Pezza, Sandra Ron, Zayed Salome, and Will Tippins. For the election of their second two-year term, we have Aunt Joe Antunovich, Sierra Boatwright, Jeff Golette, Stacy Grundy, Jackie Taylor Holston, Evan Yan, Gregory Miller, Lauren Pacheco, and Sarah Van Dommelen. The next slate is for the newly nominated board members. For election for their first two-year term, we have Ron Kluwer, Eric Dexter, Mariah DeGeneiro, Magdalena Noval Echo-Ren, and Jane Lorash. Members Gary Anderson and Bonnie McDonald have made a motion to approve and second the slate of candidates as presented. Only Landmark Illinois members are able to vote on the board candidates. According to our bylaws, a member is someone who has a properly completed membership application on file and whose dues have been paid in full for their current year of membership as of today. Please vote now on the entire slate of candidates using the poll that was just launched on your screen. You can click approve, do not approve, abstain from voting. After you have voted, please click submit. I want to note that only participants today via Zoom can see the poll. As was posted on our website, voting can only be conducted using the Zoom poll, so our Facebook Live users do not have the capacity to vote. We will pause for 10 more seconds to allow the votes to be counted.
The poll is now closed and the slate of candidates has been approved by the members, Ally.
The yeses have it. The members have been voted to accept the slate as presented. Welcome to our new and returning board members. Members can now click on the X on their Zoom screen to close the poll. For the information of our members, the Landmarks Illinois Board of Directors approved the following officers as of our June 20th meeting. For chair, we have Gary Anderson, vice chair, Erica Block, secretary, Amelia Padilla, treasurer, Terry Solis, president and CEO, Bonnie McDonald, chief operating officer, Frank Butterfield. I want to close by thanking the board members who are departing the board for their years of service to Landmarks Illinois. Jean Follett has been one of our organization's most dedicated and longest serving volunteer. She also holds a unique title, having been both a board member and a past staff member, as well as serving twice as the interim executive director. We cannot possibly list all of the ways that Jean has served Landmarks Illinois in her combined 12 years on the board, but a few including executive committee member, preservation issues committee chair, strategic planning task force chair and co-chair, that's twice, newsletter editor, field representative, major donor, and the list goes on. Next, we have Jennifer Spence, who has served on the board for 2 years and has been an active member of the Resource Development Committee and the Executive Committee Chair of our Communications and Marketing Committee. Jennifer is the Director of Marketing for Ventura Bank, partnered with us to launch the Landmarks Illinois Ventura Bank Preserve Southern Illinois grant program. And next we have Kathleen Swing, who has served on the Landmarks Illinois General Counsel for the past 5 years as a volunteer position, where she has been both served as a board and by the staff by providing thousands of hours of pro bono legal counsel. Kathy has been an executive committee and reinvestment committee member and was instrumental in helping Landmarks Illinois to close its first reinvestment program loan. Kathy is stepping away from the board to devote more time to the new law firm that she just joined in the fall. Lastly, we have Jack Trivia, president of Berglund Construction Reservation Division, who has served on the board for a total of 12 years and has been an active member, Preservation Fund and Easement Committee, and a Real Estate and Building Industries Council Committee member, and has provided countless hours of pro bono construction assessments for Landmarks Illinois partners. We look forward to continuing to work with these former board leaders in other ways as volunteers. This concludes my portion of the business presentation. Now let me turn the program over to our Chief Operating Officer, Frank Butterfield, to give our 2022-2023 annual report.
Thank you so much, Ally. It's my pleasure to join everyone here today to present Landmarks Illinois' annual report. With another action-packed year, I'm going to spend my time today sharing only one small slice of the work that you helped make possible. So I encourage you to read the full annual report, which is available on our website, landmarks.org. This year, Landmarks Illinois accepted 2 new preservation easements. The 1850s Charles Wenner House in Galena is listed on the National Register of Historic Places and is surrounded by more than 60 acres of natural habitat. The farmhouse has 20-inch thick walls of locally quarried limestone and was built by settlers who came to Galena to work the lead mines. Landmarks Illinois' easement protects the historic farmhouse, while that surrounding habitat is also protected under a conservation easement with the Joe Davies Conservation Foundation. Thank you to Brian McCormick and Rob Latusik for the donation of these easements. Landmarks Illinois also accepted a preservation easement on a prominent historic greystone, the John E. Russman House, also known as the Jefferson Ice House, in Chicago's Logan Square neighborhood. The 1908 home features elements of the Richardsonian Romanesque and Beaux-Art architectural styles. The house is part of the Logan Square Boulevard's historic district and listed in the National Register. Landmarks Illinois easements also protects the original side yard. So thank you to David Berkey and Andrew Schneider for this easement donation. By holding these two easements, Landmarks Illinois is committed to monitoring and defending the preservation of these places in perpetuity. They are now part of about 550 easements Landmarks Illinois holds statewide. At Landmarks Illinois, we are committed to providing direct assistance to people saving places for people all across the state. Over the past year, we provided $80,000 in grant funds, which included the new Landmarks Illinois Banterra Bank Preserve Southern Illinois grant program. Grant recipients this year included the Hardin County Independent in Elizabethtown, Brood on Broadway and Pinup Salon in Cesar, the Grand Riverview Mansion Hotel in Golconda, and a commercial building in Murfreesboro's Main Street District. Focus on the commercial corridors of Southern Illinois. This is the first grant program of Landmarks Illinois that has targeted a specific Illinois economic development region. And it's also the organization's first grant program offered to private building owners, developers, and for-profit business owners. We look forward to the upcoming year in which this program will support downtown revitalization throughout Southern Illinois. The next deadline for the Landmarks Illinois Banterra Bank Preserve Southern Illinois grant is July 1st, so get those applications in soon. A major accomplishment this year was working with state lawmakers to extend and expand the Illinois Historic Preservation Tax Credit Program. The tax credit program launched in 2019 following a decade of Landmarks Illinois advocacy. The initial program capped the annual allocation of tax credits at $15 million and had an expiration date of December 31st, 2023. So entering this year, we wanted to see this valuable program not only extended, but expanded. And we had the data on our side. A report prepared by Place Economics for the Illinois Department of Natural Resources showed, for example, that 99% of housing units created through this program have been affordable. So thank you to the State Historic Preservation Office for facilitating the completion of this economic impact report and for their work administering the state tax credit program. So we got to work joined by our partners at AIA Illinois, and we're in the halls of the state legislature for direct legislative advocacy. We facilitated the introduction of the legislation to extend and expand the program. Quinn Adamowski, Regional Advocacy Manager, and Gary Anderson, our board chair, testified at key committee hearings in Springfield. Because of this work, despite a challenging economic climate, the Illinois State Historic Preservation Tax Credit Program was extended for an additional 5 years, along with an additional $50 million in available tax credit allocation over those 5 years. So when you look at the first 10 years of this historic tax credit program in the state, we're going to see $200 million in tax credit allocations available to projects throughout Illinois. I want to also make sure I take a moment to highlight another incredible preservation success story from this year, saving the Ebony Test Kitchen. Our efforts to preserve the kitchen from the former Johnson Publishing Company building on South Michigan Avenue in Chicago began around 2018. But just earlier this month, we were able to share the news that the kitchen has found a new home at the Smithsonian's National Museum of African American History and Culture. The test kitchen will be part of the permanent collection at the museum in Washington, D.C. Landmarks Illinois produced a video that shares more about this monumental preservation project. Please join me in watching it now. And it'll take a second to get that video loaded.
Now, I'm a writer, right? And I still struggle with describing this space because it's so fantastic. There's color, there's form, there's modernity. The Ebony Test Kitchen is outrageously unique, but also played this critical role in Black history and Black culinary history. When I heard that Test Kitchen was in danger of being demolished, I knew that an important place would be lost.
Ebony Magazine and the Johnson Publishing Company writ large, I think, has been so influential in terms of thinking about the ways that Black culture informs American culture.
The Johnson Publishing Building is an incredibly significant building. You have a Black businessman building his building on Michigan Avenue, fronting Grant Park in the early 1970s. That is a heck of a statement. And then you open the door to go inside, and it is this wild mix of color and texture. You can only imagine the freedom that embodied for a group of people who, less than generations before, were constrained and restricted in every way.
The first time I walked into the building, wow, certainly it looked like an exciting place to work. I was the first food editor to work in the test kitchen, where I would test the recipes for the magazine.
Recipes that every Black mother tried, cut out, pasted in her own book, and it kind of became part of the Black culinary experience.
The test kitchen was a way that we could carry those food traditions on to the next generation. When I heard that the building was being sold, I was very disturbed about it. I mean, that's a significant part of the African-American legacy.
When the building sold in 2017, Landmarks Illinois was working with the city of Chicago actually on a proposal for landmarking the building. In addition to that, we were called by Lee Bay about his concern of what would happen with the test kitchen, which was really what was left inside the building.
I was working for the DeSable Museum of African American History, and just called the developer up and said, what can we as a museum do to get this space? But the museum didn't have the money. So trying to figure out who could demount this space, I was talking to my good friends at Landmarks Illinois.
So Landmarks Illinois stepped in, and with about 2 weeks before it was to be demolished, we negotiated with the developer to purchase the test kitchen for $1, to organize an incredible group of volunteers led by Chris Ank of our Skyline Council. And over a weekend, we carefully dismantled every piece, from the 900-pound range hood to the garbage disposal. And we put together an advisory committee to help us understand who best would be the next owner.
It was so exciting to imagine that there was this organization that was going to bring these people together to save this thing that meant so much to an entire generation, and that we actually had the power to do it.
With them, we put together a request for proposals, and the one that stood out to us was from the Museum of Food and Drink in New York City, who was going to use the test kitchen as the center of their new exhibit, African American Making the Nation's Table.
At the Smithsonian, we've long been aware of the test kitchen as an exciting object. When it was a MoFad, I had curators who called me up and showed me pictures of how great the kitchen looked. So we began conversations with Landmarks Illinois.
We were overjoyed to hear from the Smithsonian. They contacted us to begin the process of exploring if they could take ownership.
This is such an elegant, important, and historically significant object.
It belongs at the Smithsonian, where everyone can enjoy it.
Now we're really excited about it being permanently here at the National Museum of African American History and Culture.
It's exciting that the Smithsonian is going to put this kitchen as part of their permanent collection. It gives it the prominence it deserves as an important place in America.
We can't understand American history without African American history, and that takes all of us to help preserve these sometimes untold stories. Landmarks Illinois and the Ebony Test Kitchen really help us realize that we have to go further in preservation.
It would be easy for a preservation organization to just sort of raise the alarm, but to get actively and say, listen, I think we're the solution to this. It's a heck of a move.
I'm forever indebted to Landmarks Illinois for not only springing into action in that way, but really offering permission for everybody to really understand the role they can play in saving things they think are important.
Such important and exciting news to share. So thank you to all of you for your support on the work we've accomplished together at Landmarks Illinois over this past year. Now, I'm pleased to turn the program over to Bonnie McDonald, our President and CEO, to talk about our future and the innovative path that we're charting for preservation. Bonnie?
Oh, thanks so much, Frank. And as you said, that video was so inspiring. That project is amazing. So just testing, you can hear me? Great. All right. I've had the mic is live. So I just want to say I'm very excited to talk with you all about the Relevancy Project, which has been a 4-year passion project researching the future of preservation. And today I'll talk about what led to the Relevancy Project, its components, and how it is shaping the way that we are thinking at Landmarks Illinois about our future and the future of preservation. You know, Landmarks Illinois is proud to be amongst the those that are leading this national conversation about the change that's really needed in preservation practice. And we are putting our ideas into action as well. You know, the genesis of the Relevancy Project was a coalescing of our collective experiences with the challenges that face our work every day. The challenges that many of you, our members, our partners, our advocates tell us about. And unfortunately, we've had years of fighting the same fights, and not without glimmers of hope, of course. There has been incredible progress, but we continue to face the same things, like a lack of support from our elected officials and appointed officials, challenges to historic preservation ordinances, you know, trying to protect those tools that we have, and even the tools that we have don't always have the kind of teeth that we need them to have. We have owners that are fighting the designation, even when we get it, trying to de-designate their historic properties. In the case of the photo that I have here, this was a conversation with the city of Evanston about the Harley Clark Mansion, which is owned by the city of Evanston and is a designated landmark, and at the time was being proposed by the city to demolish its own landmark. So we think this is indicative of those challenges. We have, you know, continued difficulty attracting the investment that we need in historic places all across the state. And then there's the misconception or the misinformation about historic preservation, and that it's too expensive, it's too hard, that there isn't enough interest from the public in it, or that the properties are all, you know, energy inefficient. And constantly, there's just not enough financial tools, not enough incentives. And when we do have those incentives, they are under attack, like the 2017 effort to do away with the federal historic tax credit. We lost the 10% federal non-historic tax credit. And thankfully, because of the efforts of so many AIA Illinois and Landmarks Illinois, we were able to save the Illinois Historic Preservation Tax Credit. You know, but with all those things that I just mentioned, we were asking ourselves, what is it really going to take to change these narratives, to stop fighting those same fights? And we were approaching our 50th anniversary in 2021 and decided that that was the perfect time to have this period of evaluation to answer that question. What can we do to change these outcomes, to stop having these same conversations? Now, what we did need to do as an organization was to evaluate how we could be continually effective 50 years into the future, you know, into our next 5 decades. And we asked ourselves, how can we also anticipate the changes that are coming to position ourselves to be relevant in the future? Now, what underlies those ongoing challenges that I just mentioned? You know, frankly, it's difficult to hear, but preservation is not relevant enough to enough people. And either they don't know about the work, maybe they haven't experienced it, or they don't understand what it takes. They might enjoy the end product, but don't know all of the steps that it takes, how hard it can be to get this work done. People may buy into that misinformation that I mentioned. To others, preservation may be seen as a luxury or even something that will lead to community gentrification and displacement. So what do I mean when I use the word relevant? as kind of a, a buzzword or a cliche at this point. But, truly it's meaningful. When something is relevant to a person, what it means is that it connects to something, that it relates to something, and that it's applicable to something that they really care about. We're all here on this call because we care about preservation. When something is relevant to us, we are willing to engage with it and we're willing to take action. So you might ask, okay, does it really matter that preservation is irrelevant to some people? It does matter. When not enough people care about older and historic places, it really limits the support that we can mobilize: political support, social support, and financial support. Now, Landmarks Illinois is not alone in calling attention to preservation's relevancy challenges. The National Trust for Historic Preservation conducted an August 2019 online survey of the preservation field that was entitled Challenges and Innovations Occurring in the Preservation Field. And 1,000 people responded to that online survey. And the responses were illuminating. 86% of the respondents felt that preservation needed to innovate. 86%. 92% wanted our work to be fair and to be equitable. And 96% wanted to ensure that we were telling the complete American story through our work. That's pretty compelling results. And this was even further illuminated in an additional study that I show here. More than 2,000 preservation professionals participated in this second study that was done by the University of Pennsylvania, Professor Randy Mason, that was published in March of 2022. Like the National Trust's findings, the UPenn research demonstrated a consensus about the need for substantial change in preservation, noting that the pressure to do so, was coming from not only inside, like that percentages I told you, but it's also coming from outside the preservation field. Now, respondents felt that preservation needed to be more diverse, that we needed to cultivate our new leadership and also cultivate new partnerships, and that we need our focus to turn to intangible heritage as well. And significantly, this UPenn survey also found, quote unquote, deep divides within the field over how to change. And that in many cases is what's preventing us from truly moving forward to make the changes that I'd like to talk to you about today. So as Landmarks Illinois approached our 50th anniversary, we formed a task force that met monthly for over a year, exploring and committing to the change that we felt we needed to make preservation more relevant to more people across Illinois. And the outcome were our guiding principles that you see here. The guiding principles, Will Tippins presented these at the annual meeting in 2021, so you can go back and see that presentation. You can read them on our website. This is just a fraction. There's more in there, like definitions. But what we do is consider these guiding principles as a code of conduct for our future engagement with communities as we focus on needed change. We now use these principles to evaluate, to inform, and to guide everything that we do as an organization. And we started that process, as I mentioned, in 2019 as we were gearing up for the 2021 50th anniversary. And that was before the studies that I mentioned were released. So we didn't have that data. We were asking ourselves, that 50th anniversary task force was asking ourselves in those tough questions, were we alone in encountering these challenges that I mentioned previously? Were we the only, statewide organization or preservation organization seeing these challenges? And even more, as we went through this process, could our work help other organizations across the country too that were having similar questions? And so I offered to, as the principal staff person for the 50th anniversary task force, to just go out and talk with people, to go out and talk with colleagues all across the country to better inform how we could approach our transformation. Thankfully, I had the privilege of, at the time, being the chair of the National Preservation Partners Network, so I had access to many, many of our colleagues across the country. And after talking with more than 20 people, it became clear right away that we were not alone, that preservationists around the country were experiencing the same prolonged challenges that we were. And to a person, they all agreed that change is needed to ensure a future for the practice of preservation. Now, more importantly, this trip began to identify that our field sees our areas of opportunity. As I talked with people, the same things kept coming up again and again as necessary, focuses, foci, for what we saw as where we needed to put our work. And even more exciting than seeing these opportunities, that I kept hearing about solutions that people were trying, and through trial and error, the successes that they were experiencing. But there were things that I had never heard about, and probably most of us in the field, because we weren't sharing them widely. They weren't being distributed to a wide audience. So the Relevancy project, as it was born and named, was envisioned as a way to share this wisdom that's in the field that we already have about our challenges and the solutions to make preservation more relevant to more people. As I mentioned, because we want their engagement, we want to help to preserve places that matter to people, the places they care about, and we would like to make sure we have their support to ensure that we can face those challenges that I mentioned. So between 2019 and 2021, I continued the interviews that I mentioned, eventually talking to 130 people representing the diversity and the opportunity both inside the preservation field as well as adjacent to our work. That was important to talk with more than just ourselves. And as I said, a common set of problems and solutions emerged. So the findings were published, or began to be published, in a series of 11 blog posts on Landmarks Illinois' preservation news page. That's our blog post, last summer and fall. And I'm compiling the full results from all of this research now as a more detailed guidebook to be released later this summer, hopefully by the end of August. Now, these are the opportunity areas. Today, I'm going to focus on these, the opportunity areas that the preservation field largely agrees upon as the way that we are going to make preservation more relevant to more people and ensure a future for these tools and for the work. So first, climate change. Climate change and its extreme weather events that it is causing is the most pressing challenge facing humankind. And I say that as I sit in our office here in downtown Chicago right now, as Northern Illinois has the worst air quality in the entire world because of the wildfires in Canada. Carbon is being emitted to the atmosphere. Carbon that's being emitted to the atmosphere through multiple sources is warming the planet. Now, building operations, and that's our bailiwick, right? The built environment. Building operations account for 27% of global carbon emissions, the single largest source of carbon emissions. And building materials and construction, so the construction of new buildings and adaptive reuse, are an additional 20%, which is called embodied or upfront carbon. So combine those two things, and it's nearly 50% of global carbon emissions. There are also estimates, which I think are really positive, that 2/3 of our existing buildings are still going to be in continued use in 2040. Preservationists, hooray, that's great news that we'll still have 2/3 of our existing buildings. If we work harder, we'll have more. But just alone in housing units, that's 50 million housing units in the nation. And that doesn't even account for industrial buildings, commercial buildings, institutional government buildings. So we have nearly 100 million buildings that are producing nearly 50% of the carbon going into the atmosphere. So making these buildings more energy efficient is essential to reduce carbon emissions. And that includes existing and historic buildings. So we need to continue to explore and to address how a changing climate is going to affect people and historic places. And that includes addressing how the change in our climate, the change in weather patterns, is going to affect the historic material. I list here, I show you here the Farnsworth House, which is located in Plano, Illinois, right next to the Fox River. And when it was designed in 1949 by Mies van der Rohe, a mid-century modernist for Dr. Edith Farnsworth, he anticipated some flooding of the river, but not that the consistent 100 and 500-year floods would come more and more frequently. And so, how is development upstream and additional extreme flooding going to affect not only this building, but others across the state? We have an opportunity, as I said, to make existing buildings more energy efficient. So there's ways to explore how to do that in a safe capacity, like adding insulation where we can, talking about the curtain walls and how to better insulate buildings in the curtain wall, and heating, ventilation, and air conditioning, using air source heat pumps, ground source heat pumps, otherwise known as geothermal, to provide a better, more clean energy in our existing buildings. There's also a move to make sure that all existing, last slide, not quite done with that one. Thanks, Caitlin. We want to move to electric energy sources indoors, which is called decarbonization, to improve indoor air quality as we begin to improve insulation. So as we insulate historic buildings, we're tightening them up, which means that the indoor air quality is at a premium. It needs to be better. And so decarbonizing is taking fossil fuels out of the indoors to ensure that they are safe for people. So how can we do that in historic buildings? So thanks, Caitlin. Next, I'm going to move over to more information about the warming climate and environmental justice. So the impact of the warming climate is having more profound effects on communities that have the fewest resources to mitigate those impacts. This affects people and the built environment. So it does have to do with historic preservation. For example, the ability for people to stay in their homes and neighborhoods. We want to ensure that communities can continue to be in and preserve the places that they care about. And climate refugees number 1 billion people around the globe at this point, people who have had to move or will have to move because of changing climate. And so we know that some of those folks we want to welcome into Illinois. So how can we also think ahead about ensuring we have historic properties that could be used for housing as well? Now, we are doing preservation work in this way when we join in environmental justice efforts. That is, when I mention environmental justice, the fair treatment and involvement of all people in the development, the implementation, and the enforcement of environmental laws and policies. That's what that means. Here, I'm showing a photo of our partners at Altgeld Gardens, which is a public housing community in the south side of Chicago, in near the Pullman community. The complex, which was built to house World War II veterans, is essentially located in what they've named a toxic donut, in the most polluting industries, a 14-mile ring of the most polluting industries in our region. And the people who are living in Altgeld Gardens has the highest rates of cancer in the city and around the region. So we want to ensure that people can stay in their homes, not only because home is important and it's part of their identity, but also thinking about the preservation of these stories and of these places. I'll just mention again one other project which we worked on recently, the Damon Silos, which are located were located in the McKinley Park neighborhood here in Chicago as well. We listed them on our most endangered historic places list, joining with the community residents who cared about the industrial heritage. These were grain silos. But also that they were proposed to be replaced by a company called MAT Asphalt for a potential asphalt yard, which had environmental concerns. So that's where we layered on an environmental justice purpose as well. Now, in the case of Altgeld Gardens that I show here, there are a number of other opportunity areas for preservation. So, number one is thinking about, as I mentioned, this story about public housing. What have we saved up to this point in preservation? It's really astounding when you hear the numbers about the National Register of Historic Places. Just 8% of the National Register listings are about the stories of women, people of color, and the LGBTQIA+ community combined. Women, people of color, LGBTQIA+, half of the public. So the numbers of stories that we're listing and protecting are growing, the number of listings in the National Register, but it's indicative that underrepresented histories have not been a focus for the preservation movement. For example, this story of our nation's paramount public housing and the people who have made communities there. So to grow a more diverse movement representing the nation, there needs to be greater priority on saving the places that tell the nation's full story. As I mentioned in the surveys, this came out again and again. And by doing so, we create a welcoming environment where people feel that their stories are being told, that they belong, that they are telling their own story and have the agency to do so. Also to self-determine what's important in their community, to name those things, and to be a part of the decision-making. That is how we will continue to build a more just and equitable preservation movement where people feel welcome and that they belong. We want to meet people where they are and make the preservation practice and process more accessible. Right now, it can be difficult for people to figure out, which is why organizations like Landmarks Illinois exist. But we want people to be able to navigate that on their own. And that is why we're working together with People for Community Recovery, which is the organization pictured here, because they have identified what's important to them in the Altgeld Gardens community, and we want to ensure that that they have the agency to protect what's important to them. So concerns about housing access, mentioning public housing. Concerns about public housing access are nearly universal despite geographic, demographic, and economic differences. 49% of Americans believe that affordable housing access is a major problem where they live. So again, nearly 50%, half of us feel that affordable housing is not accessible in our communities. And the way that pairs out between rural, suburban, and urban, 40% of rural community members, 47% of suburban, and 63% of urban residents believe that there's a lack of affordable housing and that this is a major problem in their community. So a recently released National Main Street Center study also noted that 87% of Main Street program managers, so again, nearly 90% of those who are helping our economic development and historic preservation in our main streets, were concerned about the state of housing in their downtown districts, but they really fail to see how they could be part of the solution. They need to understand how they can take action. So preservation can be more relevant by helping to solve this issue of housing affordability access, to create more housing units, including a priority on affordability in existing buildings. So here's a perfect example of where that's happening. This is developer Yafet El Amin at the Broadview Hotel located in East St. Louis. This is one of our former most endangered historic places, and it is on its way to being an affordable housing community. And we thank Yafet for her work together with us to demonstrate how the state historic tax credit, federal historic tax credit, and low-income housing tax credits are all necessary to do these complicated and these projects that are really hard to put together financially. And a Harvard University study also showed, surprisingly, and when you think about it, that we could build nonstop for 10 years in this country and still not meet the demand for housing. We are just falling behind, and adaptive reuse can be a part of the solution. We're seeing that even with commercial buildings across the country. Commercial buildings are being adapted for residential use in downtowns. So in 2021, for the first time ever, architects, the AIA AIA, American Institute of Architects International tracks what architects are doing. And for the first time, half of what architects were doing was work on existing buildings, adapting existing buildings. So there's momentum for this work and an opportunity around thinking how historic buildings can be used for housing. So special focus does need to be given to partnerships in doing this work, because we may not have all the expertise, whereas our partners do. We also want to work with them to advocate for helpful policies and more incentives, such as giving extra credit for the reuse of an existing building. Just a few years ago, the Illinois Housing Development Authority removed the extra point that you received on your application for affordable housing when you reused an existing building. So that's one thing we need to change. With adaptive reuse increasing, as I just mentioned, being at least half of the work that designers are doing, and with the need for energy retrofitting, we have a real opportunity to create more positions in design, in construction, and in the real estate services sector, more jobs. Many of these jobs, if not most, are local when you work on an existing building because you can't move it across state lines. And that means we keep the income also in our local communities. And so there's multiple benefits, of course, in job creation from historic preservation. However, within the construction industry, we have a grave shortage of trained craftspeople who are doing this work, who are teaching, who are learning the skills to work on historic places, which is a very specialized skill set. According to data in 2021 by the Associated General Contractors of America, 89% of contractors are having difficulty finding skilled or finding craft workers to do this and other construction work. And why that is so grave is because they're not replacing the 40% of construction workers that are expected to retire within the next 9 years. So we need to build up the opportunities to train more people in how to work on existing places. The Campaign for Historic Trades, which is run out of our partner organization, our sister Preservation Maryland, is one of the coalitions working to advance training and job creation in the trades. Now, in addition, here in Illinois, a few of those would be Revolution Workshop, Hire 360, Pullman Tech Workshop, and Chicago Women in the Trades. They are all organizations who we can partner with to advance job creation and skilled craftspeople. You may have seen last week our Preservation Snapshots lecture about the town of Brooklyn, Illinois, which was listed on our 2023 Most Endangered Historic Places in Illinois. Now, Brooklyn is located in the Metro East region, and it was the nation's first freedom town, but it is also quickly becoming one of the few remaining across the country. And I bring it up because we're finding that the general public is very interested in the story of Brooklyn because it has a compelling story to tell. And those who are telling its story, as you saw on the webinar, make it interesting and relatable to people. Preservationists can engage more people if we work to tell better stories about the places that we are trying to save. Usually our tours, our testimony to the public begins with what? It begins with who was the architect? What was the date of construction? What is the building style? Those things all matter to us and mean something to us, but very few people have the context to know what that means, to understand what that means. And because it's unknown, it really doesn't matter because you can't put it into something relatable in your life. It's not relevant to you. So rather than express the importance of a place, we focus on the facts and the figures. And we need to change the way we do that to share the reasons that people can relate to a place. In the case of Brooklyn, it's a story that is about seeking freedom and justice, about escaping both physical and political violence, as immigrant families are still doing today. It's about making a new home, courage, and the determination to do so. And many of us relate to these aspects of Brooklyn's story, and we want to know that the how, the why, and the what happened. So when we tell better, more relevant and accessible stories, we make a historic place more meaningful, and we grow a movement of people who are willing to take action to preserve that place. So telling a great story is really important, and we need to learn how to do it. Despite the challenges that are facing the community of Brooklyn, its residents and the descendants of its residents continue to fight for its future. And as preservationists, we understand this because we know how deeply connected people are to place. Places connect us to our memory, to culture, to community. They're about home and family and work, the characteristics that make up our individual and our community identity, the very sense of who we are. So we rarely, though, talk about these important aspects as reasons to preserve a place. We're more comfortable with the economic, the aesthetic, or even the historic arguments about why a place should be saved. So talking about these more squishy aspects, these intrinsic merits about preservation is an opportunity to connect with why places are important to people. Again, things that we all relate to: home, family, community, culture, identity. And so to go even further, and there's more about this in the blog post, there'll be more about this in the Relevancy guidebook, is that places are proven to connect with our mental well-being as well. There's a book written by Dr. Mindy Fulalove about 15 years ago, I believe, called Root Shock. And in that, what she meant by root shock is the traumatic stress reaction that's caused when people's places, their emotional ecosystems are destroyed. And in that book, she was talking about urban renewal and the destruction largely of communities of color by urban renewal, and the generational traumatic effects of that in physical and mental well-being. When people are displaced from important places, there's evidence to show that they suffer post-traumatic stress disorder, depression, anxiety, and even adjustment disorders from the distress, the physical and mental distress of this. And there's a new term that has been created to describe this even further, called solastalgia. And solastalgia, as it's been defined, refers to the pain and distress that's caused by a loss of a comforting place. Once again, solastalgia, the loss of a comforting place causes us pain and distress. The sense of desolation that we can feel, consciously or unconsciously, when home or land is lost. I show here an example of that because I know many people did grieve the loss of the Rock Island County Courthouse, which is pictured here and was destroyed earlier this year, late last year, after a protracted advocacy and legal battle by local residents and Landmarks Illinois. And just as losing a place can be traumatic, saving places can bring communities together to talk about our challenging history as a way to heal as well. Places can be like medicine. Here I use the example of the Project XV Museum in El Paso, Illinois, which is an incredible teaching museum about the 15th Amendment and people who were historically disenfranchised. So I do recommend a visit. Preservation also has a larger philosophical conversation to be had around prioritizing historic material and the people that use it today. The case in point is the Tiger Senior Apartments, which is a former high school reused as affordable senior apartments. Because the developer used the federal historic tax credits, the new windows that they put in needed to reflect the historic character of the original, which follows our standards. However, these windows are so large and heavy that the seniors who live there cannot lift them. So whose needs are being prioritized here? And the historic material has become so precious in our regulations that we sometimes pass over viable reuses and the needs of those who would use it. So additionally, I want to close here with the need for our decisions to be community driven and how imperative it is for communities to be informed, involved, and to influence outcomes. Between 2018 and 2020, the city of Chicago worked to locally landmark the Pilsen community, a historically Mexican-American neighborhood in Chicago. There had been an earlier request or call for a landmark district, but due to a regulatory trigger, they had to expedite this, and residents at public meetings that you see here commented that they hadn't had sufficient time to get information or understand the implications. So many eventually fought the designation for fear of increased maintenance cost, code enforcement, and that it might lead to gentrification and displacement, and the district failed in 2020. So had there been more information, engagement, and advocacy available, and ensuring that all this information was presented in a bilingual format, the outcome may have been different. So with all of this, you might say some of these ideas presented seem like a deviation from historic preservation, the foundations of it, because aren't we here just to save historic buildings? Climate change, racial and environmental justice, affordable housing, some would say that it's not inside our core mission. But I bring us back to the foundations of historic preservation and the creation of the National Historic Preservation Act in 1966, which was out of a report called With Heritage So Rich by the U.S. Conference of Mayors. And you can read this quote. What's most important here, I think, is that we distinguish that we are not a cult of antiquarians, and we have to go beyond saving the bricks and mortar, and that preservation must attempt to give a sense of orientation to society. That's what it was intended to do. And orientation means a way to understand our surroundings and how they came to be. Orientation is about positioning yourself and finding the direction to move forward. So through these areas of focus that I've mentioned today and that are in the Relevancy Project, we are moving preservation forward. So you can find this in-depth information in the blog posts. As I mentioned, the Relevancy Guidebook will be coming out later in August, I believe, and there's more to share with you as we finish up our Diversity, Equity, Action, Inclusion, or Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Action Plan coming later this fall, and as we proceed with transformational planning, our strategic plan where you as volunteers can get engaged. So I just want to close by saying thank you to our staff, to our board, to our financial supporters for enabling the Relevancy Project to move forward, to do this imperative research and bring out these results, to Jean Follett for being an editor and a mentor all this way. And I truly invite you to join us in this conversation and be a part of our transformation. So thank you so much for the time today. We have very little time for a question and answer. But we can take a couple of questions. So Frank, have you been looking at the chat to bring forward some questions?
Yeah, there's a question here about geothermal, and are there any federal or state incentives or grants available for geothermal?
Yeah, unfortunately, at this time, I'm not aware of specific grants that target geothermal, but in the in the federal income recovery, the IRA that was just passed, there are incentives that are planned for green energy, and that I cover in the blog post about climate change. So I would encourage people to go read that, because there are more links to incentives that have to do with the green energy portion.
Thank you for that too. There's a question here about affordable housing and how we might define affordable housing.
Yes, so there is a definition for affordable housing according to the Housing and Urban Development Department, that essentially a person can only spend 30% of their income on housing. If they spend more than 30% of essentially their take-home pay, then that unit is not affordable to them. So there is a definition for affordability.
And there's a couple of comments here, Bonnie. One of them is just mentioning Rock Island County Courthouse, and thank you for acknowledging the local trauma resulting from that demolition. So I hear that comment very strongly myself. And there's a request that if we could provide the URL to the Penn study in the chat that you mentioned.
Sure. Yes. So we're going to close in just a moment with Gary is going to come back and close out the annual meeting. I am happy to try to find it as quickly as possible, but just to let you know that everything is hyperlinked. The research that that it was used to put these blog posts together, everything is hyperlinked there, and in the Relevancy Guidebook there's an entire list of resources as well. So there's much more to share.
And then we can conclude with one last quick one. The Johnson building that housed the Ebony Test Kitchen, was that building saved?
Yes, it was saved. It is a local landmark, and it has been reused as market rate housing. Yes, thank you. Thanks for the questions, Frank. And I appreciate the time that was given to talk about this project. We look forward to hearing more from you. You can email me. My my email is on our website at landmarks.org. If you'd like to give me additional comments, questions, I'm happy to engage with you. And now I'd like to turn it over to Gary Anderson to conclude the meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Bonnie, and thank you, Frank. Listening to the presentations this afternoon, there's really a great deal of depth in the Relevancy project. And I'm even more proud to be a Landmarks Illinois volunteer as well as board chair. What this organization accomplishes is absolutely remarkable in addressing the complexities of today's preservation issues. The people that we have the opportunity to work with and the places that we are saving together, we are just beginning to tell the full story of our nation. Historic places are part of our community's unique identities as well as our own. They are important, meaningful, and worth saving. So we thank you, our dedicated and generous supporters, for the many ways that you donate toward making our impact possible. That can be as a monthly giver, a program sponsor or annual corporate sponsor, a member of the Louis Sullivan Society donor, or an event attendee, volunteer, and active social media follower. There are many ways that you can be part of our community and make a meaningful contribution, and with whatever amount of time and resources that you may have available. You can learn about all the ways to give that I just mentioned on our website at landmarks.org. Because we provide our expertise and resources for free, your support truly makes our work possible. Please give what you can and stay informed through our email blast and social media. We know that there are big things ahead for preservation across our state and for Landmarks Illinois, and we're excited to share these with you. Now, there being no further business, the 52nd annual meeting is adjourned. Thank you all for joining us and for your continued support of Landmarks Illinois. Together, we are people saving places for people. Please stay safe and be well, and we hope to see you soon. Thank you.